to the Sober Witch Life.
Sunshine, the pink-haired sober witch, and yeah, today's conversation may end up all over the place, so I apologize in advance. But I am coming off of 4 days at one of the largest metaphysical, mystical, esoteric conferences here in the United States called Convocation. The beautiful thing is Convocation is held pretty much in my backyard, right? Like almost literally, I guess, in my backyard for many years. But now it's out in Ypsilanti, which is about a 20-minute drive. This is a gathering of witches, occultists, mystics, esoteric practitioners, authors, instructors, teachers, and it's been around since 1995. As I said, it's one of the largest, and there's a handful of other conferences, one on the East Coast, one over in the Northwest, one in the South. I think there might even be another one that I know I'm aware of that is of the same size. But yeah, this is the largest one that happens pretty much in the Midwest. Oh, there's one in Minneapolis. Is Minneapolis? Or I'm sorry, Minnesota, Midwest? Okay, so maybe there's another one that's just as big. Either way, I feel crazy to say this. Like, I knew about this conference pretty much since my 20s. I remember some of the community that I started to hang around with back in my 20s before I really started my corporate career. Maybe even before I had stepped in going to college, I was a little bit more active and social. And I knew about it back then, but I'd never attended, which is wild to me to think of. And I remember it was my first time 3 years ago. I wasn't able to go last year, but 3 years ago. And I remember walking in to Convocation for the very first time and like relaxing, like my nervous system in and of itself, right? I knew I had 4 days. I was signed up not just as a participant, but I was signed up as a teacher and a ritual space holder. And I walked into this space and my nervous system just softened. I found that I was no longer scanning the room or like people around me to see how I might be perceived or how different I was or strange I was, right? Pink hair, black clothes, I had a different awareness. I realized I belonged here, right? I was not the only person with piercings. I was not the only person with wild and crazy hair, like many. Like, I think I saw pink and blue and green and teal and mohawks and shaved heads and braids and dreads. Oh, there's this woman that had these beautiful multicolored dreads that were incredible. I wish I would have seen her again because I wanted to tell her how gorgeous I thought they were. But I wasn't. I was not the only strange and unusual person in the room. I felt like I was at home, right? I knew in that moment that there was pretty much nothing that I could say that would be seen as weird, right? I also knew that I didn't have to like translate things or hold my tongue because what I might say could be against the norm, the spiritual norm, so to speak. It was at that time that I realized that I had spent a lot of time in my adult life bracing to be kind of misunderstood, bracing for the skepticism, bracing for this feeling of being strange or different, or bracing for like, oh God, I'm going to have to explain this again or find another way for them to understand, right? And I think for anyone who lives on the edge of like a mainstream culture, this kind of nervous system regulation, like feeling like you actually fit in, it's not trivial. Like, this is a really healing thing. And I think about this. I had a dear friend that joined me at Ritual Saturday night. And, she came in, and that was the only thing that she really like was there for. It was just a couple hours on Saturday. But she said as she was walking in, she had texted one of her dear friends and said, I can't miss this next year. I finally feel like I found my people. Like, just in that moment, right? This was a big, big deal to like hear and witness. I think that there's a little bit of a myth that exists out there that this mystical or esoteric community is small and that they're very scattered. But the more and the more I become aware of the community that exists out there, the more I realize there are so many of us, right? Yeah, there's a handful of people that practice in isolation, and maybe they're happy doing that, right? But there are a lot more of us out there than I think most of us realize. Convocation in and of itself is not just like a fringe. Like, I'm talking 1995 to now. They celebrated 30 years last year, right? It is incredibly structured. It is so well organized. It is a multi-day educational gathering, right? There are lectures, there are rituals, there are panel discussions, there's a marketplace, there's hospitality suites, and even a designated space for attendees that need regulation away from sensory overload. Because let's be real, a lot of us in this spiritual space are empaths, highly sensitive people, and if we're not around 1,000 people every day, stepping to an event for 4 days can be a lot, right? This, seeing how long this conference has been around, this is a big deal. When something like this has been happening for 30 years, it signals this is more than just a fad. This is more than just things being, temporarily popular. It signals a lineage, right? It signals the fact that there are folks out here that are stewarding this knowledge transfer, right? And it's not reliant upon some kind of algorithm, like you have to hope that you get it, or you've got to be, if you're the teacher or the person with the knowledge, you've got to hope that you're being seen. Like, these are spaces for tradition to be sustained and shared by a community. And I think that scale really changes things internally. For me personally, it validated that this path that I'm on is not an anomaly, right? It is a recognized spiritual current that has depth in it and has its own drive for structure. It validated this decision that I made to create the Sovereign Phoenix, to create a nonprofit that's all based around spirituality, right? Because I'm not building a hobby over here. I'm not like just doing this work as a hobby. I'm building something that I want to see living 30, 40, 50, 100 years well beyond me. And spaces like this, like Convocation, prove that this continuity is possible. Now, I know what you may be thinking, and I'm being reminded of a post that I saw like maybe last week or the week before by a very well-respected, and I respect this individual, influencer in the witchy and esoteric space. Incredibly knowledgeable. And they were talking about how they're very much so just a solitary type of practitioner. They don't mind sharing what they know, but they don't desire to kind of be in shared space. And I get that. I understand that. I also understand that for many of us, dollars are important. The money that we spend is important. But I want to talk a little bit about some of these objections, right? Number one, I'm going to start with the money piece, right? Because that's a really quick dismissal. Early bird registration for Convocation, I think, is less than maybe or just over $100. Like, I even think the 4-day pass is still only like, if you buy when you arrive, it's like $130, right? That's for nearly 4 full days of programming. 4 days, okay? And I get it. If you are not local like me, you're going to have hotel costs, food expenses. But when it comes to food expenses, I always think we always have to eat. Okay? So there is a grocery store across the street, across the major like road from the hotel. Okay? So buy the food that you need. Okay? As far as like a hotel, find a shared space. Right? Room with someone. Find a place that's a little bit off the path, right? Plan a road trip if you don't want the airfare. Or research that airfare, right? Or find alternative solutions. The truth is, if you know that this conference is going to happen again next year, you could start setting aside, I don't know, $100 every month, $20 every week, and have a nice little chunk of cash to help you make sure that you can attend. Now, the isolation, like I'm the solitary practitioner, the one that believes that they can just, learn through their books or like reading watching YouTube or reading information. I don't disagree. You can do that, right? If you were to take that $100 and go out and buy a whole stack of books, what would you get? Like if you found a really good used bookstore, you might be able to get 10 books, 15 books, right? If you went and bought them new, you would get maybe 5, right? Depending upon the size of the book. Maybe even only 4, because some of these esoteric and occult books can be really expensive, right? And those books, you get reference, you get research, reflection, amazing. I have a ton of books. I love them, right? And the books are that solitary path. But the conference is relational. And I'm not talking about the need to gather, like maybe you like to do your ritual alone, but there becomes a really, really potent kind of wisdom in gathering with people to learn. So Thursday evening through Sunday afternoon, sessions run in about 90-minute blocks from early morning, like 9 a.m., all the way up until like midnight. And you can choose, some of what I attended. And I taught and stuff too, so I did not get to attend everything that I wanted to, right? I attended an uncrossing workshop, right? We were given this beautiful blend for spiritual baths, taught, some of the ways to be able to recognize when uncrossing might be needed, the approaches to be able to do that. I attended an incredible, incredibly intense community building workshop, like why this is so needed in this world right now. I attended a time and perception workshop talking about time as it relates to the ritual and to the work that we're doing, right? I attended, what was the other one that I attended? Witch ancestor workshop, where we talked about the ancestors of the witch and how they look about and the perspective, how to call upon them in ritual, all that kind of stuff. There are so many other topics. I know my partner, he sat in on a incense. He's literally, as I am recording this morning and writing all of my stuff today, he's been making incense blends, right? Like from scratch. What? Right? I have another friend that led a workshop that was all around finding your muse. Right? I know. Another workshop he sat in was this mirrored workshop, where they were able to kind of like create this self-portrait as it related to a mirror. These experiences, not only do you get to like absorb in a real-time, hands-on fashion, right? You also get to talk with and have conversation with other people, seeing the perspective of how they learn, what they picked up, how did they see things. I sat on a panel for protection, right, with, I think there was like 6 well-known authors that shared their perspective on protection, how to do it, why it's necessary, and even how we need to do it here in this time and space right now. Yeah. The beautiful part about this that you can't do, right, is you pick up a book. You pick up 5 books, again, and you get a quarter of the way through it. What are you going to do? I suppose you could see if they have a return policy, But here, if you sat in a session for 5-10 minutes and it wasn't your jam and you weren't feeling it, you could jump into another one. You could go learn something else, right? You can't do that with a book. You just can't. Books give you information, this community, and learning this wisdom and this knowledge transfer in community gives you integration. Let's talk a little bit about being somebody in recovery in these spaces. Okay, and I'm going to start with something personal. I attended a Gnostic Mass. This is a Thelemite ritual that was created by Aleister Crowley many, many, many moons ago. And traditionally, it includes cakes of light and wine. And as someone in recovery, I am used to navigating spaces where alcohol is normalized. And for the most part, my abstinence doesn't require an explanation, but sometimes I do find myself needing to, right? The beautiful part about this is there was a juice option. They knew and understood that there might be people that did not want to partake in the alcohol, right? This was an accommodation, right? It was incredibly meaningful to me. I didn't have to ask. I didn't have to try to justify it. They had already considered individuals like me, right? And the beautiful part about Convocation, and something that I felt so privileged to be a part of this weekend, was they maintain a sober space throughout the entire weekend. So folks that are in recovery from substances or any type of addictive behaviors has a space they can gather in. I literally led the Witches Recovery Circle twice, Friday and Saturday, and had different participations in each, right? They had a game night, right? Not necessarily recovery specific, but their Serenity Suite is designed for those that need quiet, that need time to ground, that need to step away from the intensity of learning and workshops and ritual and social activity, right? These layers of very intentional inclusion signify a maturity within a spiritual ecosystem, right? Now, again, I said we're talking a little bit about those in recovery. I don't want to say that large gatherings like this don't present risk, right? My partner had mentioned that while he was waiting for me to finish one of my sessions, he was offered casually a free alcohol sample. And I get annoyed. I do at the presumption of alcohol consumption around a lot of spiritual spaces. I get annoyed, right? That's why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. But that was a reminder why it's so important to have these sober spaces at conferences, right? That they're not optional, that they're essential. So I know that if we, as a community, as a collective, not just those of us that are in recovery, are going to continue to build spiritual communities for the long run, we have to build them responsibly. Now, there's another thing I want to talk about that some folks may be rattling in their head. When we're talking about gathering in community and workshops and ritual, let's be real, those of us in the spiritual space, a lot of times the work that we're doing is very healing focused, right? So I was paying attention to that this weekend, and I talked with a handful of folks, and I hope to talk over the course of the next couple of weeks with a few other individuals just to gather their feedback. But I was paying really close attention to how space was held, right? And I have to be honest, there's a tangible difference between somebody who understands trauma-informed facilitation and somebody that doesn't. And I think it's really important that we have this sacred space and that people feel supported and grounded and in a safe emotional container, right? That there's follow-up, that there's care. So, literally, the two rituals, the ritual, I should say, in the workshop that I performed, I let these individuals know, like, please, reach out to me if you have a concern, right? I also made sure that there was time in there for us to just be, right? It was built in as part of the ritual container. I talked about safety. I talked about the regulation of the nervous system, right? I talked about the aftercare that was necessary. And I say this because at one point, as we were getting ready to set up for one of our rituals, we walked into the room, after they had finished, a really intense one. It was around rage, right? And we could hear people screaming and yelling as the doors were closed. And we walked in, and there were participants that were scattered all over the ground, and visibly depleted. And it just reminded me again of how important it is for us leaders that are leading this space to know and understand how to create trauma-informed spaces. Now, this doesn't diminish the value of the conference, but the reason why I'm sharing this is for those of you that are in recovery that join, events like this. If you walk into a space and something doesn't feel right, you should feel comfortable to walk out of it. I have a very dear friend that said they did this in more than one space, right? Because they could feel like the container was not created to hold the level of trauma that they knew they've been processing lately. Our spiritual journeys can be very intense, and that is why, again, we as leaders need to make sure that we are creating that spiritual safety. We need to be gathering feedback, And so I ask, I'm very grateful that this conference, not only is it incredible, well organized, but they are very active in gathering feedback. So the participants that were there, I hope they share the feedback if it was a concern. I know I have shared mine, just bearing witness to it, right? I hope that if there was something I have done, I hope that if there is room for improvements, that people are willing to step up and say that. This is what keeps these conferences continuing to operate and mature and grow, right? This is how they begin to thrive. As I said, this was my second year attending. In the first year, I hosted my own rituals, my own workshops, and it was really cool when months later, people were recognizing me and stating they had a really lovely time. But there was this other emotion that had been woven into that weekend, and even this weekend, and that was grief. I listened to folks that had been there for years, attending for years, some of them 10 and 20 years. And they talked about the friends that they'd missed and how delighted they were to see them again and how great it was to be keeping in contact throughout the year, but connecting every year at Convocation. And so my grief was in this truth and this realization that I had spent so much of my adult life elsewhere. Overworking, trying to fit in places that did not align with my spiritual identity. Years that might have been spent investing in community. And I wasn't, right? But I realized this is why, again, I'm working so hard to build what I'm doing. These annual gatherings create reunion points. They create memory. They create this generational lineage, And I hope that my goal is here in Michigan to create one where we, witches in recovery, can gather every year in the fall. And again, every spring we'll gather in New Orleans. That's my goal. That's my long-term vision, right? What a beautiful day it would be to have an event that was so well attended, that we have friends and family of, each other coming and joining us. And until that time, I'm going to continue to go back to Convocation and use that as one of my points. Now, for all of you that do practice alone. I want to leave you with one last message, right? Maybe you do it because you just don't know a whole slew of folks that live by you. Maybe there's not a metaphysical store by you to introduce you to these individuals. Maybe you just don't have anything showing up on Eventbrite or Meetup or Facebook where you want to gather. A multi-day conference like this may be exactly what you need. And I think of the last day, one of the presenters was saying how she had met someone on Thursday for the first time that said they lived in a particular city, not too far from here, and didn't know of any other witches or you know, spiritual folks and that were similar, right? And she brought this up as we sat in this room on Sunday and said she had gathered more than 5 names for that individual so that they made sure that they never felt alone again. A conference of this nature is going to show you the scale of the community that truly is out there. It's going to introduce you to tools that you may have never known were available, connect you to people who speak the language that you speak without hesitation, and you will establish relationships that extend far beyond this one weekend. You don't have to attend everything. You don't have to go outside of your comfort zone. You can choose whatever nourishes you and step away from what doesn't. The point is, these conferences exist to remind you that you're not alone. It's been less than 24 hours, maybe just about 24 hours since I left Convocation, and I know I'm still integrating. I've said my thank yous, I've put my post up, I've been writing this all day, writing and, doing the podcast now, and still have more I've yet to integrate. But I know this. My nervous system feels steady. Even though there is so much going on, it feels steady. Right? I'm clearer now of what we are here to do than I ever was before. The reception that we had was phenomenal. And my sense of belonging to this community, even though I still have so many folks out there I want to get to know, it's even stronger. A conference like this is not entertainment, it's infrastructure, it's community, it's this annual recalibration to align you with who you are truly meant to be. And sometimes what shifts is not what you learn, it's what you realize that you've always been a part of. And you get to walk into a room with a bunch of other witches and weirdos. And stop bracing and start feeling like you belong. So I extend this invitation for all of you that are listening to join me. I'll be there in 2027 and probably every year after. Join me, come find me, come gather in community. And if not Convocation here in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and one of the other ones that exist throughout the United States. Yeah. Until next time, my dear friends, much love from me to all of you.